Paul, we are back after a 1 week hiatus. After last week, we were at the Ecom Nation offsite, which unfortunately you couldn't be there, which is very sad.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've seen the updates on social media and they looked brilliant, courtesy of Longview Winery. So, how was it, Mal? Was it good?
It was amazing. It was amazing. Always great to get the team all in one spot. As much as great as hybrid and remote working is, there's nothing quite like getting everyone in the one place and just being able to vibe and connect and build that relationship with each other. So I'm still a big fan of meeting up in person, and even for remote teams, finding those opportunities once or twice a year to get everyone together. I think it can't be beat.
Agreed. Well, we did meet our Sydney team today for lunch, which was great. But looking forward to the next Ecommerce national meetup.
Yeah, in December. This time in
Okay,
Sydney.
good. I'll make that then.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah.
So it's been a wild week. So I was going to talk about what happened last week, but there's a couple of big things this week which I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about. Number one, which came out today, was Milkrun, which only a few weeks ago, and I talked about this in Inside Retail. I did a few interviews where I did talk about the demise of these platforms. Milkrun being resurrected from the dead and being acquired by Woolies, which I thought was a big surprise.
Yeah, I mean, cool concept, Milkrun. Terrible unit economics, but yeah, that's interesting. I mean, a lot of people. The first I saw of this was a lot of people saying, "Thank God it's back." Consumers, obviously, probably potentially not investors. So what'd they get it for? What'd they pick it up for?
$10 million.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. So it's like 8 cents on the dollar from what it was at its peak.
Okay.
So I believe it was like 85 or $95 million was valuation at one point. They raised a ton of capital, but yeah.
Okay. And
So
so what's the new model? What's the way forward for Milkrun?
Well, I think it's exactly the same. So, from my take on it, is that they're not so much buying the business as much as they are buying the concept and the culture. Because
Mm.
Milkrun did have a great mission, they had some great branding around it. They had a team which was really invested in being able to offer this service. I always argue that the big players like Woolies and Coles could have done that, like logistically and in terms of the infrastructure. They always had the infrastructure to be able to smash that, but they never really had the will to do it. I feel that by acquiring Milkrun, what they're doing is that they're buying that. They're buying that will. They're buying that culture to say, hey, we are now going to attack this instant delivery, space, this on-demand groceries, with gusto now. Similar to when it felt a lot to me, similar to when Amazon bought Zappos back in 2010, I want to say. So around that time, where they paid $1 billion for Zappos, which was just an online shoe retailer, right? But had an amazing customer service culture. They brought that focus in, and you can see that the $1 billion is like, why are they paying $1 billion? But you now look at Amazon as being the gold standard for customer service, right? And I think part of that was buying in that culture in the same way that Woolies has bought in that milk run culture to accelerate their move into that on-demand delivery business.
Yeah, it's a fair point. The Zappos one's a great example. That's definitely one of the ones that one of the first e-commerce businesses that I admired and their dedication to putting the customer first, even at the detriment of short-term profits, is I think how Tony says it or said it. And I think that's an interesting one. So, I mean, $10 million for Woolies is obviously
It's nothing.
not a lot, is it? So yeah, it's really interesting because I sort of struggle to see how the concept of, I mean, the concept is amazing. I struggle to see how it could ever be profitable. But you make a good point. I mean, so Woolies are just forking out $10 million for that concept, and I'd be really interested to see what happens with it. My understanding is that they'll rebadge one of their metro services or something to be called Milkrun from now on. And obviously, their Woolies distribution is enormous. So I imagine there'll be some, how shall we say, some economies of scale benefits that they'll bring to the table as well.
Because I think it's a standalone concept. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you're
Mm.
limited by your inventory. Like, you can't hold on to, fresh fruit and vegetables, for instance, because what if it doesn't sell? You're stuck with a warehouse full of it. So you can only have non-perishable goods. But now that you're tied in with the Woolies, who already do have that foot traffic, you've got those Metro 60 stores where you already do have people coming in, day out, and you are getting that daily replenishment of everything, bread, milk, fruits, vegetables, all those other things. You can now increase what you're offering as well. So I actually think for Woolies, if they roll this out in this way, like it's a good buy. And if it doesn't work, they make that in about 10 minutes.
They do, and Milkrun had a good brand, and I imagine it would have attracted a fairly decent database. Its problem was probably not that; its problem was profitability, I think. So I think it's probably grabbed a few customers along the way. It's probably got reasonably good brand goodwill, I suppose. So it'd be interesting to see, exactly what they can do with it. But as you say, $10 million is they would have spent more on billboards around the country probably, or magazines or whatever.
But the big one this week though is earlier in the week, buy now pay later services are soon to be regulated like credit. Which I've been talking about for a number of years now. So back when I was working, did a stint in fintech. This was a hot topic back then. And I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier, but it's finally happening now, where buy now, pay later, which is, to be honest, like credit by, by any other name, it's still credit. And it's finally happening. What do you think?
Funny. Well, you're right. Like, this has been happening since, I've got to say, 2017. It must be, because I remember this whole thing was too good to be true for a long time, and it was always about to be regulated, and then it wasn't. And that was one of the great risks, even as a shareholder. And I think I bought shares in all of them, and some did well and some didn't. Some shall remain nameless, and others did. Like, let's be honest, Afterpay did extremely well. Like, it was absolutely on a golden run. But there was always this risk, and even as a shareholder thinking about that risk of regulation, but that was talked about for so long, and it was always the big risk to that industry or to that sector, and in particular to Afterpay. And it's finally happened. Personally, for me, it's like, well, I think a lot of people have made their money, and in terms of investors, have made their money and probably sold out. And a lot of those BNPL, buy now, pay later, share prices have absolutely plunged. Lay-by was actually delisted off the ASX recently. So I think as investors, probably many have gotten out, but I think retailers might feel it, because particularly in fashion, there was a time when more than 50% of checkouts were using Afterpay or Zip or one of the other plethora of options, whether it be Klarna or Lay-by or Sezzle in the US. And part of the allure to retailers and to consumers was that it was so fast. And I assume, without knowing the technicalities, I assume that it was fast because it bypassed a lot of those credit checks. And my understanding is now that's not the case. They will be, it's credit. It is called credit now. So I imagine those approval processes are going to take longer. And if I'm not mistaken, I feel like time is of the essence in the checkout. And if there's anything that's taking too long in the checkout, it simply won't be effective anymore, or as effective.
And particularly, I think about it in terms of, and it's good that you mentioned fashion, because I think about it in terms of younger consumers as well, who are the ones who are most likely to be using buy now, pay later services. In Australia, I think there's about 6 million active BNPL users. But of that 6 million, 50%, about 55 or 45% of Gen Z and millennials are using Afterpay or using a buy now, pay later service. So that's an interesting one there, where a lot of them have shirked credit cards and said, we're not going to get a credit card. Credit cards are, that's what our parents use, We don't believe in credit, and have been using Afterpay instead. These are the consumers who are coming up and spending a lot of money now with a lot of retailers, in particular in that fashion segment and everything else. They're the next generation of spenders, but they also have really poor spending habits, as well. And I get terrified when I hear about people using buy now, pay later for everyday goods, for their everyday household items and groceries. So suddenly it's like, they're not going to have access to that anymore. So what's that going to do in terms of discretionary spending? So from a retailer point of view, I think about it from how how much of your revenue right now, how much of your checkout is through buy now, pay later, and looking at that and going like, how much of that now is at risk? So not only do we have, the tough economic conditions which we're seeing now, and the last week has really been a bit of a bloodbath, I have to say, across the board for all the retailers listening here. Suddenly we're matching that up with the fact that, the buy now, pay later space, in January, is going to change, where suddenly you're going to have this cohort of consumers who, make up, I don't know, 30-40% of overall retail spending at the moment, suddenly not being able to have, for over half of them, their favorite way to check out. What's that going to do to conversion rates? What's that going to do to spending?
That's a fair call. That's a really fair call. I mean, and I think it depends what sector you're in, but I think definitely in women's fashion, particularly younger women's fashion, we would see that, let's say AOV, yeah, you're absolutely right. 50% or more of checkouts could be using Afterpay or BNPL, and AOVs could be 10% higher for obvious reasons. And so if that's taken away, that's actually a material difference. That's a material decline in revenue. And I think there's some brands and sectors that'll feel it more than others. But I think this will certainly result in a lot less people using buy now, pay later. It has to. And I think that if there are brands, and we know there are, who are sitting at 50% of their checkout or more using those channels, they will lose sales. 100%. Their conversion rate will drop. Their AOV rate will drop. And I think that's not what people need to hear right now. And I guess, is it the right thing to do or not? I'm reading an article here on theconversation.com about, somebody defaulting on a $40 purchase, or being late rather on a $40 BNPL purchase, would result in an effective annual interest rate of 28.5% for, 28 to 29% for most of the big BNPL players. So there's real penalties there for missing your payments. So it's important that consumers are, and I guess a lot of this comes from consumers borrowing more than they can, more than they should. So that's not to be forgotten. And I think that's really important, that it is important to put checks and balances in place for people not to borrow more money than they should. And my understanding is that part of this is simply about that, is simply about making sure that this is treated as real credit. You do owe it. It is a loan. So that's fine. I definitely understand all of that. But certainly, I think that there are online retailers who will absolutely feel this. And if you are an online retailer, I think you should carefully evaluate. If I was looking at this, I wonder how I would look at it. I'd probably look at the percentage of my customers at checkout that are using BNPL, and I would monitor that fairly carefully over the next couple of months. And probably it's very hard to combat now. It's probably a lot of brands use it on their homepage. A lot of brands use it in their EDMs. It's not an easy one because you can't just roll out something that replaces it.
I remember doing so much CRO testing, of actually having you can use Afterpay here, but putting the Afterpay logo at checkout.
That was a big test.
It was a huge test, but it always worked. It would be a 20-30% increase, in your conversion rates just by putting that Afterpay logo.
Yeah,
there.
So it's not like you can sort of say, don't worry about that, put something else on. I mean, PayPal and so on have brought out different options for competing against that, but it's an interesting one because it's not like you can swap out Afterpay and put something else in. Yeah. This is a fundamental change to AOV probably and conversion rate.
It could also just be looking at, changing that buying behavior as well. So that rather than buying that $1,000 dress and paying it in 4, just buy the $250 dress, you can pay it in 1. So whether from retailers, just thinking about what's your product mix. So making sure you do have some offerings there, which are at a lower price point. So, which are comparable as well. So I don't know how easy, obviously that's not easy to roll out, but just thinking that, that girl going to Coachella, that person going to Coachella buying that $1,000 dress, she can't afford the $1,000 dress anymore. So now she's forced to look at something which is more affordable, more within her price bracket, which would be a $250 dress. So then how do you make sure that there's something there for her to buy at that price point?
Not a bad call, because why people use BNPL is presumably because they can't afford their purchase or they want to extend themselves. And so one way of combating that is absolutely to offer more value. And I think we've spoken about this before. It's sort of like a lot of brands trying to elevate pricing, lift pricing, get people to spend more. But value and price are always, let's say price is always one of the biggest levers. And I do sometimes think many brands kind of jump up a level on their ASP, their average selling price, um, and not have enough in that lower ASP bucket. That's a really interesting it's a really interesting idea, and I think it's a tough one, but particularly in like apparel and things like that, where we're constantly everything that we do is geared towards increasing AOV, like let's bump our prices up. But there are there's more than one way to increase AOV. It's not always about increasing prices. It could be about getting the t-shirt plus the socks plus the undies plus the keyring. And I think there's a lot of revenue to be made in those lower ASP price points, which a lot of brands do seem to kind of skip over.
I think a lot of it comes back to value as well. Going back for the pricing analogy, it's like it's not just about even with sales, rather than discounting, why not try to add more value?
Mm.
So at the end of the day, a sale is meant to encourage a sale of something, right? It's meant to encourage someone to spend their money now rather than later. So it's about increasing, it's about increasing your AOV, it's about increasing conversion rate. But you can do that without necessarily discounting as well. You can do that by providing more value through gift with purchase or bundling, or whatever that needs to look like. But it's about adding value, and
Yeah.
value isn't always about reducing the price as well. Although in this case, we're saying about having some cheaper options.
Yeah, cheaper options, but not necessarily discounted options.
Mm.
Just having the array of selling points covered is interesting or important. But I think the point is right at the moment, retailers are in a tough space. How many interest rate rises have we had? 11. There's probably a couple more coming. Retail is absolutely slowing down. BNPL now has had the brakes put on it. This is going to be. Look, I don't think it's going to be catastrophic for many brands, but I definitely think, particularly in apparel,
Mm.
I think particularly in apparel and younger apparel, I think you will see a material difference. So I think it's just another obstacle at the moment, and in many respects, it's just another reason to go back to basics and focus on, as you just said, focus on value and how are the ways which we can demonstrate that what we're providing you is better than what the competition is providing you? How are we better value than the competition? But I tell you what, it's a tough time to do it. And again, like I don't think many retailers were quaking in their boots, but it is definitely likely to have a material impact on some businesses. And I would definitely challenge retailers out there to monitor your checkout in terms of percentage of payment method. So let's have a look at, let's say, Afterpay. How many, the percentage of your checkouts that occur using Afterpay, and if they start to trend down, then you are one of those businesses that are going to be affected by this.
And also from the product point of view, if you really wanted to go down the rabbit hole with this, have a look at what people are checking out with and using Afterpay. So what products are in there? So then you can actually look at, okay, well, what percentage of my total sales, what are those things which people are tending to use more for BNPL services versus what are people just happy to pay, without using credit?
Yeah, yeah, good point. And I think finally on that BNPL issue is shareholders will be dumping their shares.
Yeah,
That's already started happening.
they were
Thankfully,
at the toilet already.
yeah, thankfully I did that a while ago for most of them, and it was fun while it lasted. But you know what? I think we always knew it was going to be fun while it lasted. I don't think anybody is super surprised. My big surprise here is that it took as long as it did. And a lot of people made hay while the sun was shining. A lot of people made a lot of money out of this industry. And now I think, let's wait for the next big shiny thing to come along because this one is probably done.
Wise words. Thanks, Paul.
Good to see you, Mal. Talk to you next Friday.
See you then.